Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Yoma Daf Nun Beis, and we are starting 4 lines down. The first thing that we're going to do tonight is analyze a comment from Reb Nosson, and this comment from Reb Nosson will take about an amud to analyze, and then we'll learn a Mishnah that will focus in on the actual walking pathway and the mechanics of the Torah that was brought lifnai v'lifnim on Yom Kippur. A very beautiful Gemara, and hopefully the little drawing that I just sent to the WhatsApp group will be helpful to those who are more visual. Let's get started. So here we are. Here's Reb Nosson's statement, 4 lines down on Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Nosson, as mentioned, there was this thing called an amatroxin. And I'll show you in this screenshot here as to what the amatroxin was a reference to. If you see here, right where my cursor is, the amatroxin was a space that separated this part of the Heichal, referred to as the Kodesh, from this part of the Heichal, which was the Kodesh HaKodashim. So the amatroxin, this one amma space, is what we're talking about here. So Rav Nosson says the amatroxin, we didn't know if it was treated like the lifnai v'lifnim, or if it was treated like this. So says the Gemara, I don't understand your problem. 6 lines down on Nun Beis Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, Maskif la Ravina. I'm just going to keep this up because I'm going to keep this screen up because, as you'll see momentarily, it'll be very helpful as we navigate this Gemara. So says the Gemara, Ravina says, my taima, what was the confusion about this amatroxin, about the status of this one amma of space between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim? What was the problem? So says the Gemara as follows: if it's because of the pasuk that makes reference to the east to west reference of length, that we see here, it's 60, right? This is pasuk number 1. It's shishim ama orko ve'esrim rochbo v'shloshim ama komaso. So pasuk 1 references 60 at length, 60 amos. That's approximately 90 to 100 feet. We'll see, and then separately we have referencing the Kodesh, that the Kodesh is 40, ve'arboim be'ama haya habayis asher hayechal lifnoi. We'll see, and then the last pasuk that we're going to speak about speaks about this unit of 20. We'll see, v'lifnei hadvir esrim ama orach ve'esrim ama rocha ve'esrim ama komaso. So it says the Gemara, we have 3 pasukim. One pasuk says that the whole Heichal was 60. One pasuk says that the Kodesh was 40 and that the Kodesh HaKodashim was 20. V'lo yadi'inan, if what you're saying is, Reb Nosson, that you don't understand if the amatroxin was measured as one of the 40, or if it was measured as one of the 20, imehani esrim v'imehani arbaim, why does it have to be one or the other? Maybe this number really should be 61, 40 plus 20 plus 1 plus the amatroxin. So says the Gemara, v'dilma lo mehani esrim v'lo mehani arbaim. Maybe this one amma measurement does not come from the count of 20. This remains a full 20. And maybe it doesn't come from the 40. This remains a full 40. And really, this number should be 61. The whole x-axis, the whole east-west line of the Heichal from the wall of the Ulam to the back wall of the Aron, maybe it's really 61, 40 for the Kodesh, and 20 for the Kodesh HaKodashim, and 1 amma for the amatroxin. So that's what the Gemara says. V'chalala. Maybe we should say v'chalala kachashiv, that when the pasukim made the measurements, that it only includes the chalala, the open space. Koslim lo kachashiv, but it doesn't include the walls, and maybe that's why where everything should be fine. So what was the concern of the chachamim? But even before we get to the answer, the Gemara says as follows: Teda, you should know, had it been that we were going to include the koslim, chashiv le ledidei, they were always mentioned explicitly, and therefore this amatroxin, which in the first Beis Hamikdash was actually a 1 amma thick wall, this is its own unit of measure, and in fact we dafka should assume that it's 61 here, 40 plus 1 plus 20, and the 1 of the amma is not absorbed either in the 40 or in the 20. So it says the Gemara, chashiv le'ledidei, that whenever walls were going to be focused on, we always included their measurements explicitly. Ditznan, as the Mishnah writes, we saw this once before, ha'heichal mea al mea, the whole heichal space, this whole large area was 100, al mea berum mea, it was 100 squared. Fine. So says the Gemara, Kosel ulam chamesh. The wall here of the ulam was actually, I drew it as a pen line, but it's actually 5 amos wide, a very thick wall. The ulam achas esrei. The ulam itself from here to here was 11. And then kosel hahechal sheish. This wall was 6. Then ve'archo arbaim ama. Then here, like we've seen, the space from the gap, from the wall of the ulam to the wall of the amatroxin was 40. And then take a look at these next two words, ve'amatroxin. And the word amatroxin means that those words tell us that the actual space of the amatroxin of this area was specifically not included in the 40 measurement or in the 20. And as well, let's finish up the brisa. The kaf ama base kodesh akodashim, 20 amos from the end of the amatroxin until the back wall of the heichal. And then kosel heichal sheish, this wall was actually 6 thick. The hatah sheish, and then there was a space behind that was another 6. The kosel hatah chamesh, and then there was another wall here that was 5. But the point is, from this whole brisa, is that we know explicitly that the amatroxin was its own measure and it was not included in the 40 and not included in the 20. So going back to where we started, what was Reb Nosson confused about? There's nothing to be confused about. We have an explicit brisa that the amatroxin was separate of the measurements of the 40 and of the 20. So then says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. His concern wasn't one of measurements. Ella kedushte ikilifnim ikilechutz. Really what he was saying was as follows. Reb Nosson's question was, his lack of clarity was, this space right here, the amatroxin, which level of kedusha does it have? Is it like the lower level, like we have over here, of the general kodesh, or is it like the greater level of this area, which contains the Aron Bris Hashem? What is the level of kedusha here? That's what was unknown. That's what was unknown. The Hainu de Amar Rav Yochanan, we're 7 lines from the bottom. This is exactly what Rav Yochanan was asking. I'm sorry, this is what Rav Yochanan says that somebody else was asking. Boy, Yosef Ish Hutzal. Yosef Ish Hutzal was asking the following question based on the pasuk. Udvir besoch habayis mipnima hechin lesiton sham es aron bris Hashem. Udvir, there was a separator. This is our amatroxin that was placed in the inner sanctum to separate and prepare us for the aron bris Hashem. And ibaylahu, Yosef Ish Hutzal asked the following question: Hechi ka'amar kra. How do we read the pasuk? So the question of the Gemara is like this. Do we read the pasuk like this, 5 lines from the bottom? Udvir besoch habayis mipnima, only inside of that wall, hechin lesito sham, namely the wall is excluded, the kedusha line. The kedusha line is here. Do we say that the kedusha line is right here, and everything to the east is the lower level of kedusha? Odil mahachi kamar udvir besoch habayis mipnima, or do we say no, the holy line is here, and really the amatroxin has a higher level of sanctity? That was his lack of clarity. Says the Gemara, no way. There's no way that Yosef Ish Hutzal had a doubt about what this pasuk meant, because we only have 5 psukim in the Torah that we are unclear about. Says the Gemara, could Yosef Ish Hutzal really have had a lack of clarity in a pasuk? After all, the Tanya, the Brisa writes, Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Chamesh mikros b'Torah ein lehem echreya. There are 5 psukim in the Torah that lack clarity, and our discussion is not one of them. What are the 5? For this, we turn to the top of Nun Beis Mid Beis, and for the sake of saving time, what I would tell you to do is actually take a look later at the psukim toward the bottom of your page if you have them quoted here, and if not, looking them up is amazing. But the pasuk here has one word of se'es, and really the question is, I'll just say the first one out, and then you can look later at all the other ones. The first one says se'es, and the pasuk reads, Halo im tetiv se'es, be'im lo seitiv la pesach chatas rovetz. Pasuk continues as well. So the question is, where's the comma in the pasuk? Is the comma like this? Halo im tetiv se'es, comma, and ve'im lo seitiv la pesach chatas rovetz, or no? Halo im tetiv, and then se'es ve'im lo seitiv. So where do we put the commas? All 5 of them are like this. One example is se'es, another one is mishukadim, another one is machar, another one is arur, another one is v'kam, and none of them are our case. So how could it be that in our case of Yosef Ish Hutzal, that he had any element of doubt at all about the pasuk? Every pasuk in the Torah is clear, with the exception of these 5. V'hatanya, and here's the real kicker. V'hatanya, who Yosef Ish Hutzal, this person who we're discussing, Yosef Ish Hutzal, who Rav Yochanan said was asking the question about where the kedusha, the amatroxin, lies. He is who Yosef Habavli, who Isi ben Yehuda. He's the same person. His name is sometimes called Yosef Habavli. Sometimes he's called Isi ben Yehuda, who Isi ben Gur Aryeh. Sometimes he was called by that name, who Isi ben Gamliel, who Isi ben Mahalalel. He was called all of these different names, but Yosef Ish Hutzal was the same as the person who quoted this brisa, which was Isi ben Yehuda. So there's no way that he had a suffix about a pasuk. It's not possible. So if you want to say that the suffix of the pasuk was, as we saw on the bottom of Nun Beis Amud Aleph, when the pasuk says Udvir b'soch habayis mipnima, and he's not sure about pshat in the pasuk, says the Gemara, that's not possible. He himself said there are only 5 psukim that are mesupak, and this isn't one of them. So answers the Gemara, you're asking good. Let's just say one more point. Umashimo, what was his real name? He's got 6 or 7 stage names. What was his real name? His real name was Isi ben Akiva Shimon. Okay, our question has been asked. How can Yosef Ish Hutzal say that there's a suffix in a pasuk? Because answered the Gemara very cleverly, B'de'oraisa. It's true in the Torah there are only those 5 psukim that we're not sure about. However, but in Navi there are plenty of them. And if you would have looked on the side in the Maseches Hashas, in the Maseches Hashas, you would see the Maseches Hashas, but in the Ein Mishpat Mitzvah on the side, you would have seen that this pasuk is located in Sefer Melachim. So the fact is that we are able to get out of this problem because it's talking about the Nevi'im. So asks the Gemara, Ubede Oraisa Leka. In the Torah, there's only 5. I can show you a Mari Makom in the name of Rav Chizda where there's more than 5. Here it is. The Ha'ika, there's another one, the boy Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda asked, how do we understand the pasuk? Vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael v'alu olos kevasim v'yizbechu zevachim shalamim parim o dilma idi v'idi parim. Does the word parim go only on shlamim, or does the word parim go back even on olos? So says the Gemara, that's not a good question because that's not our shita. We're talking about Isi ben Yehuda. We're talking about Yosef Ish Hutzal. Rav Chizda Mesafkale. Rav Chizda had trouble with that pasuk, but Isi ben Yehuda didn't have trouble with that. Yosef, Isi ben Yehuda was totally fine. Isi ben Yehuda pshita. So then our question and answer stand. Let's summarize up until now. Very, very simple. Reb Nosson said that there was a level of suffix in regards to how we treat the Amatraxim. The Gemara goes through all the math, like we just pointed out here, 20 plus 1 plus 40. The Gemara says that cannot be the kasha. And the Gemara concludes that the reason why we have any element of suffix isn't because of the measurements, but rather because of the status of Kedusha of this one space, as was the kasha of Yosef Ish Hutzal. And the reason why we were confused was because of a pasuk in Malachim. The pasuk in Malachim reads 5 lines from the bottom of the Beis Amud Aleph, Utvir, B'soch habayis mipnima v'chul. And that brings us to the Mishnah. Now, we're going to see this picture on the screen is going to detail here. I drew a little stick figure. I'm not an artist. And thank God for my iPhone, because this box here was drawn against my iPhone because I don't have any rulers with me where I am. Here's what the Gemara says. This is a Kohen Gadol right here. And the Kohen Gadol, remember, he's going in for the Ketores Lifnai B'Lifnim. He's carrying with him a pan of coals in his right hand and the Ketores in his left. Let's go look at this new Mishnah. This Mishnah is 12 lines down or so, Nun Beis Amud Beis. Hachitzona haisa perufa min hadarom upnimis min hatzafon. The 2 parochos, one was prufa, one was pinned back on the darom, on the south side, and the other one was pinned back on the north side. So here's what he would do. He would walk in between the mizbeach and the menorah. He would go around the first of the parochos, entering at the southern side, and he'd walk northbound. And then he'd wrap around the left paroches, the western paroches, with the opening at the north, and walk down to the Aron Bris Hashem. And let's see this inside. Says the Gemara, the right, the first and right and eastern paroches was opened at the bottom, at the south, and then he'd wrap around and he'd go up to the next one, which was open at the north. Mahalach beinei, and he'd walk between them, just like this. He'd walk between them. Ad shemagia litzafon, then he'd get to the north. Higia litzafon, then hofech panav ledarom, then he would turn walking southward. Mahalach lesmolo ima paroches, he'd walk with the paroches now on his left side because he's walking south. Ad shemagia la'aron, then he'd get to the space right here. The Aron was centered in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and then he Gila Aron. Then he would turn to face west, and then what he would do is Nosen es hamachta bein shnei habadim. He would place on the floor. He'd put the machta, the coals, right here. These are the badim, the poles of the Aron. It was oriented in such a way where the poles ran east-west. So he was able to conveniently place the machta, the coals, right here. Rashi highlights the orientation of the badim and the Aron. The machta was put here, and then he would make a pile of Torres on top of the Gechalim, which were right here. And then V'nismale kol habayis kulo ashan, the whole room would fill up with smoke. In fact, that was a halachic parameter. He couldn't leave until that took place. So he had to wait until the room filled up with smoke. And then when he would leave, then Yatza, he would go out the way that he came in. Yatza ovalo derech beis knisa, so he'd go the same way. And when he got into the Heichal, he would pause. He would pause. Umispalel tefillah ktsara bebeis hachitzon. He would say a short tefillah right here. V'lo hayamarich bitfilaso shelo lehavis es Yisrael. But when he was davening here, before he would exit the ulam and exit so the people could see him, he said a quick tefillah, but he couldn't say a lengthy tefillah. Why not? Because the reason he couldn't say a lengthy tefillah was because it would frighten people that it took him so long. So they didn't want he didn't want to cause fear that he died, and therefore he only said a short tefillah. So opens the Gemara b'Mayaskinon. This Mishnah is very, very complicated. Why? Because which Beis Hamikdash are we dealing with? Now we learned yesterday that there was some unique features of the Mikdash Rishon and some unique features of the Mikdash Sheni. Yesterday we highlighted the Mikdash Rishon had an actual wall here. It was an amatrox and it was a wall with one entrance point. It wasn't two curtains like this. That was Mikdash Rishon. Mikdash Sheni, we said, was built like this because we didn't know which side, where the Kedusha was. So we had to build them an Amma. Fine. Says the Gemara, Ilema Mikdash Rishon. If you're going to say that the drawing that we have today is really Mikdash Rishon, the Mishnah that we have here on Nun Beis is talking about the first base of Mikdash, Nihabu Paroches. There wasn't a Paroches. It was an Amatroxin. So this can't be talking about Mikdash Rishon. Eleva Mikdash Sheni. But if you want to say it's Mikdash Sheni, Mihavu Aaron. We didn't have the Aron during the second Beis HaMikdash. And this is a brisa that we've already seen. The Hatanya, the brisa writes, Misha Nignaz Aron, Nignaz Imo. When the Aron was Nignaz, when it was hidden away, there were other things that were hidden away with it. Nignaz Imo Tzinsenes Haman, there was a container that had in it a sampling of the man. Also, Vitzluchis Shemen HaMishcha, a jug containing the oils for the anointing of kings and Kohanim. Umaklo Shel Aron Ishkedo Fracheha, and the staff of Aaron that had on it the almonds and the flowers. Ve'argas sheshagru plishtim dorn lelokei Yisrael, and the plishtim gave a present to the Jewish people after they tried to steal. Well, they stole it successfully. They stole the Aron. They saw it was not doing well for them, to say the least. They sent a gift, and that box was meant to be kept next to the Aron. Shene'emar, as the pasuk writes, "Ukli hazahav asher heshivosam lo Hashem," when they were giving a guilt offering for what they did. Tasimu be'argaz mitzido. You should put the box next to the Beis Hamikdash. V'shilachtem oso b'halach. Fine. So that box also. But the point is that we didn't have the Aron in the second Beis Hamikdash. So our Mishnah says that he put the machta between the badim. So how can you say this is the second Beis Hamikdash if there's an Aron? How can you say it's the first Beis Hamikdash if there's parochas? It doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, before we even get to the answer, who is the one who did the Geniza, who actually hid and seemingly buried the Aron? Says the Gemara, Yoshiyahu Genazo. Ma Rasha Genazo. Why did he do that? So answers the Gemara, Rasha Kasuv. He saw a pasuk. The pasuk reads, Yolach Hashem osach ves malkecha asher takim alecha. There's going to be a king placed upon you. He knew things were going south, and he made an executive decision to hide and bury the Aron Bris Hashem. Says the Gemara, Amad v'ganzo. Shene'emar v'yamar la'odim ha'mevinim l'cho Yisrael ha'kadoshim Hashem tenues Aron ha'kodesh b'bayis ha'shebon Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael ein lachem masa b'katef ata yivdu es Hashem elokechem es amo Yisrael. Amar Rebbe Lazar asya shema shema. There's a gzeres hakasuv that indicates shema shema. One word shema talking about the man, and another one talking about the Aron Bris Hashem. That the man was going to be buried with the Aron. Vasya Doros. There's another Gzeres HaKasuv, one talking about the man and one talking about the Mishnah. Vasi Mishmeres, one talking about the man and one talking about the Mated, the staff. So therefore, we see that all of these things were buried as well. So then that's where our question mark goes. I don't understand which Beis Hamikdash is it. If Yoshiyahu buried it along with the man v'chulei, if he buried it, so then we don't have anything left. It says the Gemara, really la'olam b'mikdash sheni. Really, there was no Aron here. Poof, it's gone. Goodbye. There was no Aron here at all. He would go to the approximate base. The X was still here that I drew in, but there was no Aron. So he'd put down the machta here, the coals right here, and he would do the Torah like it was, but there was no Aron. Says the Gemara, how can that be? The Brisa says explicitly, Nasan es hamachta, the bein shnei abadim. It told us a specific measured location. It has to be in between the poles. Answers the Gemara, 5-6 lines from the bottom. Ema, you're right. Ema kibein shnei abadim, at the approximate location where the shnei abadim should be. So then says the Gemara as follows, last sugya for the night. Sabar esaktores al gabe agacholim. It says that in our Mishnah, it says that he made a pile. He made a pile of all of the ktores right on top of the gacheles. So it says the Gemara, first of all, Tanan Keman Amar Tzobra. Remember, yesterday we saw Machlokas in the Gemara. One shita was of the opinion that he made a large pile of the ktores because it took longer to burn that way, because the ktores that was at the top of the pile was further from the fire. So it took longer to burn. And yesterday we also saw another shita that it was spread out so that it could smoke up very quickly. Here we see that our Mishnah, the Tana of our Mishnah holds Keman Amar Tzobra, that it was in a pile. Anyways, Tanicha the Tzobra Pnima Shichutzalo. One Tana said that he would put the Tzobra, he'd make a pile in the middle of the coals, and then he would also sprinkle some on the way out closer to him. He would actually make the pile on the outside right near him, and then he would sprinkle more going inwards, which sounds a little bit more dangerous, as we'll soon see. Amar Abaye, you're right. These two brises are reflective of a machloket. It seems to make sense that it would be pnima shichutzalo, that he would do it in this particular way. Datnan. Why? You shouldn't do it directly in front of you. You might burn yourself. So you have to put it on in a very careful way to make sure that you wouldn't get burnt, as the Kohen Gadol. We're going to stop right here at the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. If you look over the next blot and a half, which is tomorrow night's Gemara, you will see that there is a massive amount of ground to cover. So basically, Nun Gimel and Nun Daled Amud Aleph should be tomorrow night. But keep going with me for a second. Nun Daled Amud Beis and Nun Hey should be for Shabbos, but if you look at Nun Vav Amud Aleph, it's a super short blot. So I'm going to break things up a little differently than I normally do in order to make sure that I could teach a reasonable amount for each of the upcoming few shiurim. So we'll stop right here on the top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, wishing you all beautiful